The first notice arrived just 3 days after Marcus moved in. It was slipped into his mailbox on heavy, expensive cardstock, citing a violation for his lawn being 5% over the allowable weed-to-grass ratio. He'd shrugged it off, a bizarre but harmless welcome to suburban life. The second came a week later, condemning the non-conforming shade of his porch light, which cast a soft gold instead of the mandated cool white. The whispers started then, subtle and sharp as needles at the neighborhood block party. He was the newcomer, the outlier who had bought the old Henderson place. And he didn't seem to understand the way things were done. Marcus was a quiet, private man. He had poured every spare dollar and ounce of his energy into this house, a modest but charming two-story with a gable roof, seeing it as his final sanctuary after years of grinding work. He wanted peace, a patch of green to call his own, and the simple pleasure of a quiet morning on his own porch. The HOA, led by its president, a man named Alistair Finch, seemed to view his desire for solitude as a personal affront. The notices escalated from pedantic to punitive. A fine for his trash cans being visible from the street an hour after pickup. A warning for the unapproved emotional support of a small, potted succulent on his front step. Each interaction with Finch, a man with a smile as thin and cold as a razor blade, was a masterclass in passive aggression. "We just want to maintain standards, Marcus," he'd say, his voice slick with faux concern. "It's for the collective good." The true harassment began after Marcus, pushed to his limit, formally contested a $500 fine at a board meeting. He presented photos, receipts, logical arguments. He was met with stony silence and Finch's condescending smile. The collective good, it seemed, did not include him. It started with small, cruel pranks. His newspaper, delivered daily for 20 years, began to vanish. Dog waste was smeared on his front door. One Tuesday, he found his car windshield coated in a sticky, syrupy substance that took an hour to scrub off. The police, when he called, were sympathetic but powerless. Neighbor disputes. They sighed, taking notes that would lead nowhere. The message was clear. He was not welcome. He was being squeezed out. Then came the morning it all came to a head. A low, mechanical rumble pulled Marcus from a fitful sleep. He stumbled to his front door, yanking it open to a scene of surreal destruction. Overnight, a trench had been dug around the entire perimeter of his property. It was 4 feet wide and at least 6 feet deep, a raw, muddy gash in the earth that severed his driveway, cut across his lawn, and isolated his home like a fortress. His car was stranded on the other side. The smell of damp soil and diesel fuel hung heavy in the air. Standing on the opposite lip of the chasm, clipboard in hand, was Alistair Finch, flanked by 2 men in hard hats. "Ah, Marcus," Finch called out, his voice cheerful over the abyss. "Just in time. We're installing a new neighborhood drainage system, a vital project for the collective good. It's a shame your lot is the primary conduit. It's going to be messy for quite some time." Marcus stood frozen, his dream home transformed into a prison, his sanctuary into a battleground. The sheer, brazen audacity of it stole his breath. This was no longer about grass length or porch lights. This was a declaration of war, a physical manifestation of the hatred festering beneath the neighborhood's manicured surface. As he stared at the impassable trench, a cold, hard resolve settled in his chest. They had thought he was alone and powerless. But in that moment, Marcus realized the trench they had dug wasn't just a barrier to keep him in. It was the very thing that would expose their darkness, and a perfect place to bury their secrets. The first complaint about his lawn's lack of uniformity felt pedantic. The second, demanding he rip out the small tomato and herb garden his grandmother had helped him plant in the backyard, felt personal. The third, a citation for the way his sedan was parked squarely in his own driveway, allegedly disrupting the community's aesthetic harmony, felt targeted. It was after that third notice, standing at his window and watching a perfectly parallel white SUV in his neighbor's identical driveway, that the cold, unsettling truth finally clicked into place. Marcus did a slow, deliberate mental walk through the neighborhood, past the manicured lawns and nearly identical facades. He realized, with a jolt that settled like a stone in his gut, that his was the only black face behind any of those doors. The whispers, The stares that he dismissed as typical suburban nosiness now took on a sinister, unified meaning. This wasn't about community standards. It was about him. Still, he fought the rising tide of anger with a wall of calm. He had worked too hard, sacrificed too much with his home to let them provoke him. He trimmed his lawn to a pudding green perfection, even though it broke his heart to do so. He knelt in the soil and, with a grimace, pulled up the vibrant tomato plants, the fragrant basil and rosemary, the tangible connection to his family. He documented every interaction, saved every absurd notice, and responded with polite, formal letters. He was playing by the rules, a game he believed had a referee. But the HOA was playing a different game entirely. His compliance was seen not as capitulation, but as weakness. The harassment intensified. A brick was thrown through his living room window with a vile, racist slur painted on it. The police, once again, were politely useless. The neighborhood, in its pristine silence, closed ranks. He was alone in a house that was no longer a sanctuary, but the epicenter of a cold war. Then came the night of the rumbling. He was awake, staring at the ceiling, when a low growl of diesel engines fractured the quiet. He peered through the blinds to see the ghostly shapes of a backhoe and an excavator, their details obscured by the darkness, positioning themselves at the edge of his property. He knew then that the final, decisive move was being made. The next morning, he stepped outside into a scene of calculated devastation. A trench, raw and deep, encircled his entire property. It was a moat in everything but water, a 4-foot wide, 6-foot deep chasm of exposed clay and shattered sprinkler lines. It severed his driveway, leaving his car stranded on the other side like a discarded toy. The smell was of violated earth and diesel fuel. Across the divide, Alistair Finch stood with cluster board members, their faces impassive. "Marcus," Finch called out, his voice dripping with feigned sympathy. "A necessary, if inconvenient, neighborhood drainage project. Your lot, unfortunately, is a logical pathway. For the collective good, you understand." Marcus said nothing. He simply looked at the trench, then at Finch, then back at the trench. The sheer, brutal audacity of it was meant to be the final blow, a physical manifestation of their power meant to break his spirit. But as he stood there, a strange calm settled over him. The mask was off. The subtlety was gone. They had shown their hand in the most grotesque way possible. What Alistair Finch, his board, didn't know, what they could never have anticipated, was that Marcus was not just a hard-working man who wanted peace. He was also a man who believed in documentation, in evidence, and in the power of the truth. Hidden in the soffit of his roof was a high-resolution, weatherproof security camera, equipped with night vision and audio capture, its feed backing up to a secure, off-site server. It had recorded everything. The placement of the equipment, the deliberate digging of the trench, the entire damning conversation. They had dug this trench to isolate him, but in doing so, they had also dug their own grave. Marcus turned and walked back inside, not with defeat, but with purpose. It was time to make a phone call to his lawyer, and to let the whole world see the moat they had built. The first brick through his window, accompanied by that ugly spray-painted slur, had been the turning point. The police's tepid response, a prank likely kids, had confirmed his deepest suspicion. He was on his own. So, Marcus had taken matters into his own hands. Under the guise of installing new gutter guards, he had a local security firm, owned by a trusted friend from his old neighborhood, install a comprehensive, nearly invisible surveillance system. Tiny cameras were nestled in birdhouses, integrated into porch light fixtures, and positioned high in the soffits, their wide-angle lenses offering a silent, unblinking view of his entire property line. He never mentioned them to a soul. They were his insurance policy. Now, as he sat in his study, the house an island in a sea of mud, he accessed the encrypted server. The time-stamped footage from a previous night unfolded with the chilling clarity of a documentary. The first clip showed 11:47 p.m. The street was silent, bathed in the eerie blue of the security lights. Then, headlights cut through the darkness. Not one but two trucks, a massive backhoe and a smaller excavator, rolled to a stop not at the community's common area, but directly opposite his driveway. The doors of a sleek sedan opened, and out stepped Alistair Finch and two other HOA board members, Barbara and Charles. They huddled under the street lamp, their breath misting in the cool air. Finch pointed a commanding finger, first at Marcus's house, then tracing a line in the air that perfectly mirrored the path of the future trench. This was no municipal project. This was a targeted strike, planned and overseen by the neighborhood's leading citizens. The audio, captured by a microphone hidden in a fake rock near the fence, was even more damning. He heard the foreman's gruff voice. "You sure about this, Mr. Finch?" "The permit says." Finch's voice, slick and dismissive, cut him off. "The permit is handled. Just dig where we showed you. His property line and only his. This is a private land matter." Then came the conversation that turned Marcus's blood to ice. As the massive teeth of the backhoe bit into the pristine lawn for the first time, Barbara, the board secretary, let out a light, cruel laugh. "Well, there goes his curb appeal. A real shame." Charles chuckled in response. "Think he'll get the message now? Or will we need to turn off his water next?" Finch's reply was calm, final. "Let's see how long he lasts now. A man can't live on an island forever." Marcus leaned back, his hands trembling not with fear, but with a white-hot, focused rage. This wasn't just harassment. It was a conspiracy. It was a deliberate, malicious campaign to devalue his property, to isolate him, to break his spirit and force him out. They weren't just bending rules. They were wielding their petty authority like a cudgel, confident that their positions and their uniformity would protect them. He made copies of the footage, saving them to multiple cloud drives, and a physical hard drive he placed in his fireproof safe. He edited a master file, compiling the most damning moments. The explicit instruction to dig only around his home, the callous laughter, Finch's smug pronouncement. As he worked, a new resolve solidified within him. This was no longer just about defending his home. He thought of the for sale sign that had been in his own yard before he bought the place, and the nervousness of the previous owners. He thought of the other families of color who might look at this picture-perfect neighborhood online, never knowing the rot that festered beneath its surface. If he took a quiet settlement, signed a non-disclosure agreement, and walked away, he would be complicit. Finch, Barbara, and Charles would simply wait for the next undesirable and unleash the same machinery of intimidation. His silence would be their permission. They had dug this trench to bury him. But Marcus knew, with a profound and steady certainty, that he would use it instead to bury them. He picked up his phone, his thumb hovering over his lawyer's contact. But then he paused and opened a new contact instead. A journalist from the city's major investigative newspaper who had once written about housing discrimination. This wasn't just a legal battle anymore. It was a reckoning. Marcus did not storm out to confront them. He did not shout or make empty threats. Instead, he moved with the cold, deliberate precision of a man laying a trap. He spent days in his study, a commander in his isolated fortress, compiling the evidence. He meticulously time-stamped the video clips, creating a damning chronology that began with the first discriminatory notice and culminated in the trench's excavation. He had transcripts printed of the late-night conversations, with Finch's and the board's cruel laughter highlighted in bold. This was no longer a homeowner's gripe. It was a prosecutor's dossier. His first call was to Eleanor Vance, a renowned civil rights attorney whose name he knew from a landmark housing discrimination case that had made national news. Her voice, when he explained the situation, was not one of surprise, but of grim recognition. "Send me the files," she said simply. When she called back after reviewing the footage, her tone was incisive. "This is as blatant as it gets. They've handed us everything we need." The HOA's response to Eleanor's first formal letter was a masterpiece of arrogant denial. Alistair Finch's lawyer responded with bluster, citing the drainage project and threatening to countersue for defamation and legal fees. They were confident, insulated by their bylaws and their belief that Marcus, a lone individual, would eventually buckle under the financial and emotional strain of a legal battle. They had done this before in subtler ways, and they had always won. Their confidence shattered the day the county housing board, armed with the video evidence Marcus's lawyer had provided, announced a formal investigation and issued an immediate cease and desist order on the drainage project. But that was only the first tremor. Marcus, after a long conversation with Eleanor and his family, made a calculated decision. Silence was complicity. He would not settle quietly. He created a simple, anonymous website and uploaded the master video file, titling it The Moat. The internet did the rest. The footage, with its crystal-clear audio of Finch's instructions and the board members' mocking laughter, was a perfect storm of outrage. It went viral not in hours, but in minutes. News alerts blared. Suburban HOA digs trench around black homeowner's home. The story was picked up by national networks. The narrative so visually and morally stark that it needed little explanation. The trench. Suddenly, the smug, private world of the HOA board was blasted into the harsh light of public scrutiny. Alastair Finch, caught on camera sneering, "Let's see how long he lasts now," found a mob of reporters on his own pristine lawn. Barbara and Charles had their social media profiles flooded with fury. Civil rights organizations, including the NAACP, held press conferences on the sidewalk just beyond the trench, their voices amplified by a forest of microphones. The HOA's lawyers, who had once been so aggressive, went silent, then scrambled to contain the damage. The county DA's office opened a criminal investigation into conspiracy and civil rights violations. The collective good had been exposed as a vicious lie. The trench, that immense physical symbol of exclusion, had been their ultimate mistake. They had intended it to be a barrier, a tool of intimidation that would force Marcus into submission. But in their hubris, they had instead built the very evidence that would destroy them. It was no longer a moat around Marcus's castle. It was a grave they had dug for their own reputations, their authority, and their bigoted version of community. The world was now watching, and it was looking directly into the chasm they had created. The fallout was swift, public, and merciless. The county's investigation, propelled into overdrive by the glare of national media, confirmed what Marcus's footage had already proven. The trench was a sham. No permits existed for a drainage project on his property line. No engineering studies supported it. The sole purpose, as stated in the official report, was to harass, intimidate, and devalue the property of a single homeowner. The HOA's facade of bureaucratic legitimacy crumbled into dust. The consequences were both financial and personal. The HOA was slapped with massive fines from the county and the state's housing authority for egregious civil rights violations. Their insurance refused to cover the intentional acts of discrimination, leaving the members personally liable. Alastair Finch, Barbara, and Charles were forcibly removed from the board by a unanimous vote of the terrified and mortified remaining residents, who suddenly found their own property values plummeting and their neighborhood branded as a modern-day sundown town. Civil lawsuits from Marcus, now representing a class of previous homeowners who had been quietly pressured to sell, bled the HOA's coffers dry. But for Marcus, sitting on his porch on a quiet spring morning, the truest victory was not measured in dollars or official sanctions. It was in a profound, resonant silence that had replaced the whispers. It was in a hesitant, but genuine, wave from a neighbor who had once crossed the street to avoid him. The legal win was a necessary battle, but the peace he now felt was the war's ultimate prize. The trench, that symbol of hate, was filled in by a crew hired by the new HOA board at their own expense. Fresh, vibrant sod was laid down, a green scar tissue healing over the raw earth. Yet, Marcus ensured a single, subtle reminder remained. At the corner of his property, he placed a flat, smooth river stone. To anyone else, it was simple landscaping. But to him, it was a memorial to the battle fought and a testament to the ground he had held. His story did not end at the property line. It became a warning shot heard across the country. He was contacted by legislators drafting stronger laws against housing discrimination, using his case as a cornerstone. He received letters from hundreds of people, black families, LGBTQ plus couples, young families of all backgrounds, thanking him for his courage. They shared their own stories of HOA harassment, and for the first time, many felt empowered to fight back. Marcus had given them a blueprint. Document everything, find the right allies, and never, ever be afraid to expose the truth. The individuals who had orchestrated the campaign against him found that their reputations were the one trench that could never be filled. Finch's business collapsed. The others became pariahs, their names permanently stained by the court records and the indelible digital footprint of their cruelty. Today, Marcus still lives in his home. The morning sun warms his face, and the scent from his new, flourishing garden, bigger and more vibrant than the last, drifts on the breeze. He had bought the house seeking a quiet refuge, and after a great storm, he had finally found it. The people who had tried to intimidate him had, indeed, dug a hole for themselves. But Marcus had done more than just watch them fall into it. He had held up a lantern, illuminating their descent for the entire world to see, ensuring that the darkness they tried to spread was the very thing that ultimately consumed them. His home was more than a structure. It was a monument to resilience, a quiet testament that the most powerful weapon against intimidation is a person standing firm on their own land, refusing to be moved.